Welcome to the May 2nd, 2023 City Council Budget Work Session. I'd like to turn it over to City Manager Benda to walk us through the agenda overview.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor. Mr. Vice Mayor, welcome back from your honeymoon. Glad to have you back. We missed you last week. And City Council members, happy Tuesday, if you will. So, run a show for today. Donna, she walked through some reconciliation components last week. We got your feedback. She has a presentation that she'll walk you through to look at baseline assumptions about the budget and what's in, and show you what that looks like, and then have an opportunity to have a conversation. There's, since we last met, we sent a memorandum to you. Councilman Hegelson had talked to us about the B poll. We got some information from Mitch and working with the city attorney, and with Greg, we've got a path forward with it, so that'll be a part of Donna's presentation. One of the questions still kind of looming or being discussed is horizons and whether or not to invest in that opportunity that, if you'll recall, rehabilitating a building here in town that they would then occupy, and it would help serve as a different point of contact for our officers, our sheriffs in the counties that are looking to house people that are experiencing certain kind of mental health crisis, and that requires to take several of our officers off the street. This would be a resource that, instead of the officers waiting with them at the hospital, they could take them to this resource that Horizons would staff, and that and I know that Vice Mayor Ferralli is very familiar, but Melissa Lucy's been very successful working with the state to get resources. They've received $7 million. The balance needed, if you will, is call it $4.1 million. So with that, Mayor, that's where we are as far as pending items and possible people as far as Donna's presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think last week went really well, Ms. Witt, when you presented first and got through everything before we started asking questions. So I'd like to ask council to give the respect to Ms. Witt again so she can get through everything first. So go ahead.
Thank you. So this really is kind of a compilation of what we've heard, where we are, and kind of what it looks like. So let's see if you think so. So our baseline assumptions for today's reconciliation: the local contribution to Lynchburg City Schools is set at the 2023 level funding of $40.8 million. The BPOL license requirement, y'all got a memo last week about the $150,000 and whether that could be taken off the bottom. Mitch is here if you do have questions on this, but realize, working with the city attorney and state code, that wasn't really an option. So what we threw out there was to waive all businesses for a license requirement of $200,000 and less, which is what's in state code. So this reduces city revenue by $75,000 for your BPOL tax. We previously had assumed $650,000 in revenue reduction to exempt all the gross receipts under $150,000 from taxation. So, and it's only going to cost $75,000. So this would add $575,000 back in as budget savings to offset the department and service level cuts, and especially where there were people in positions that would be cut. So the services proposed for restoration, those are on your left, my left, maybe you're right, I don't know. Restored services, so what we would do is we would not close the Templeton Senior Center, the collection windows. We would put the demolition funding back in, the right-of-way mowing for that contracted service, the funding for the on-site citywide training, funding for occupational health, which is for law enforcement and whoever to go get their testing and all that they need, the reduced, put back the staffing for the youth and adult library programming, and also for, to put back the staffing for the hours for the museum. So everything else that was on that list remains cut from service. So it still eliminates the hanging of the banners and the holiday decorations, the contributions to LRBA, the State of the City event, reduce funding for the snow removal. We would depend on that money that's sitting in the reserve. Reduce contracted services for tree cutting. Reduce funding for event public relations contracted services for camera operators. Reduce funding for the Miller Park pool season shortened by 10 days. And then the miscellaneous other reductions that were on those lists. These are still out. So what's in at 89 cents? So what's in is the full public safety package as outlined in the proposed budget. So we went over this last week. This includes all the public safety employees that are targeted for the progression and compression increases, the LPD positions and operational support, the other new public safety positions and operational support, including those cybersecurity positions, the constitutional officers positions, and also the LPD take-home program. So all those are in. The 5% general wage increase for non-sworn general employees is in, and a level funding contribution for Lynchburg City Schools at $40.8 million. Okay. So that still leaves us with a balance to find, of which we would increase our social services reimbursement revenue by about $600,000. We finally got the Blue Ridge Regional Jail budget, which reduces about $400,000 from the manager's proposed. The reduced budget flexibility of $4.6 million, which is the vacant positions, funding for vacant positions, and replacing the ongoing fleet replacement funds with one-time funds of 2.6. Also, there continues to be the budget cuts and the service level reductions of $852,000. And this includes the budget service level reductions, elimination of the city council salaries, and eliminating funding to discretionary external service providers. So that's what 89 cents looks like. We had some questions about what happens if it's 93 cents. Councilman Dolan asked about 99 cents. So we walked through what's really in for 89 cents, which is the unprecedented investment in public safety and the competitive wage increases for the city. If you went to the 93 cents, you would also add back any of the service level cuts and increase the school's funding by the $2.1 million that we've talked about before. If you went to the 99 cents, it puts back the service cuts, the $2.1 million for Lynchburg City Schools, and also the $4.6 million, which was the vacancy savings, and the $2.6 million for the fleet replacement. Instead of using one-time money, we would use recurring money, which, when it says budget flexibility, that's really what it is. It gives us options should a recession occur, something happen that we would need that flexibility, it would be there. So those are the scenarios, what's in, what's out, and that's it. Happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Witt. Any councilors have any questions? Vice Mayor Peralta.
Thank you, Donna. Would you mind going back to the, what's it, one more, not sure what the title was, sorry, one more.
Yeah, thank you. You had mentioned with the snow removal, using one-time funds to pay for that out of our reserve. What's that reserve sitting at for that?
$250,000.
And how much have we used usually out of that?
The last couple of years, we have not had to use
Right.
it. And maybe the year before that, we actually filled up the salt barn. But we've been blessed with some mild winters. So, and this is also for the piece that we contract to help staff to do this. So, because this is part of the highway maintenance funding reimbursement that we received. So it
From-
reduces from DDOT.
Yeah. Thought so.
So, so this actually reduces the contracted piece, leaves the city piece in place, And then if we needed to, we have that $250,000 in reserve that could put that back in.
So
It's
would it be
just not
accurate to
as-
say while it's being adjusted, the service is not necessarily being impacted?
That's correct. We would just, if it really snowed, we'd have to count on the reserve money that we haven't had to use in the past.
Okay. When was the last, do you know the last time we had to use that?
Like I said, I think the last time we
And I
used
know
it,
you're
we
not
actually
the-
filled up the salt barn.
Yeah.
I don't know who's sitting behind me. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had a number of heavy snows that
Yeah,
we
I
needed
remember.
all of it.
Yeah, okay. And I know you're not, that's
Yeah.
not your department.
That's
but-
not in my head.
No, it's okay. Just a refresher, how much was 1% for, out of the 5 for a general wage increase?
You're asking me.
5.
516, I believe.
Okay.
Look, I magically will get a text here in a second.
No, that's okay.
It's just over $500,000 because it's less now because public safety has moved into their own progression and plans.
Understood. The next question I had was a little bit more related to council specific, so I wanted to leave that to the side, at least till the end of the, or later on in the meeting, so if there were any other questions at this point, I'd happily yield.
Maybe Mitch can come up here. What's regarding the beep hole? And obviously, this is vastly different from what was suggested and pushed for. Simply just, this doesn't create any parity by just raising the exemption, but the parity was to say, we exempted businesses from their first $150,000 of business license tax. Now there was going to be, original estimates were somewhere about $1 million in the reduction by saying, hey, it's a 10% reduction in the rate as opposed to, for the businesses, what they pay, as opposed to just, the easy way of kind of looking at it was the remembrance that we waived it completely for small businesses. From that, we had a meeting in finance a while back where we said, okay, there's other issues. I mean, there's some businesses that are bigger that now have got nothing for it because they still have that rate. And so this, it doesn't look like it does anything from what we discussed. Maybe you can help me, Mitch, or?
Well, there was a couple of things. One was if we look at reducing the rate,
Look at that.
which I agree that I think revenue should be controlled by the rate. I really do. And that was one possibility. And then we also looked at the exclusion. And the 400, Enrico has the 400, Chesterfield has the $300,000 exclusion. And the dollar amount for us that was going to be generated from that was $650,000. And then when we got to investigating the exclusion, the only way you could do the exclusion of gross receipts is if you still required the flat fee. And that's part of what we wanted to get away from, was that flat fee part, which would still require those smaller businesses, they would have to file. And we didn't want to do that. And then we ended up just looking at the $200,000, which is allowed by state code. You cannot require a business license for gross receipts $200,000 and less, and that's where the new number was arrived at.
And so we've done that, so we've waived the gross receipts for small businesses, the license. And so now the premise was, hey, what about businesses that actually employ lots of people? And this is the gross receipts tax is a tax just on the gross, not the net. So it's one of the crazy taxes and we've heard from businesses, or I've heard from lots of businesses, their revenues have increased because their cost of goods sold have gone up. The cost of the materials have skyrocketed. And so now with that, that's why I think we're seeing somewhere around a 10% increase in the business license tax from last year to this year in the proposed budget. And with that, having at least some level of cut in the rate, I think you said was probably the easiest way of doing it, rather than some exemption only exempting the smallest businesses to not have to pay a license. Something that can help all the businesses in Lynchburg, because we want the businesses in Lynchburg to grow and thrive so they can actually employ people. When they employ people, that's one of the first steps of getting people out of poverty, is getting a job. And So this really doesn't do what the proposal was about. So where did just I'm kind of surprised where this came from, so.
Yeah, that I'll have to defer to Greg on that piece.
Yeah, so what we originally looked at, what we believe the intent of the proposal was to essentially eliminate the first $150,000 in gross receipts from taxation, period, for every business, large and small.
So that equates to 650.
650.
So then instead of lowering the tax rate by 10%, you lower them by 6.5%. You get the exact same way, right? Would that be a-
Yes, but you impact businesses in a different way by doing that. In that, so first and foremost, just to be clear, that type of exemption, exempting the 150, it turns out there's no enabling legislation. We can't do
And I
it,
think we
right?
had talked about that a long time ago. Before that, it wasn't referring to the exemption, it was referring to the rate.
So
What we do have control over.
so the rate can be set at any level, right? But if we went from doing a $150,000 exemption, which has the largest impact on businesses of $2 million or less, I think that number's right, Mitch, right? 2 million is about the break
Correct,
even.
$2 million's a break.
That has the largest impact on businesses with $2 million or less in gross receipts. If we impact the rate, that has the largest increase on the largest businesses in the city, because obviously the largest businesses have the largest gross receipts, thereby any reduction in the rate is going to impact those businesses the most. Since the intent of the proposal seemed to be to impact small and medium-sized businesses the most, we thought maximizing the exemption for filing would imperfectly get closer to that goal than a rate reduction, which is necessarily going to impact the largest businesses in the city the most. But of course, it's at council's discretion to.
And so when we're looking at like tax policy, you know, a lot of times you look at like, you know, we have taxes on cigarettes. Why do we have taxes on cigarettes? To encourage smoking or discourage smoking? Why do we have taxes on a business, their gross receipts? To discourage business? Maybe we ought to lower it to actually encourage it, doing the opposite of what we do with cigarettes. We tax businesses on their gross to discourage business. Do we discourage large businesses from employing more people? So that, to me, it sounds very counter to what we want to do in the city. And what we want to do in the city is get more businesses to invest, more businesses to employ more people, more big businesses to make a ton of money and grow like gangbusters so they can fill up the city coffers so we can pay for all the other city services. And so the incentive, when we're some of the highest rates, it's should be incumbent upon us to start saying, hey, we're going to be a little more business friendly. We're going to actually start lowering those rates to encourage, because these gross receipts tax, I mean, that's, you know, when you talk to businesses and they got to pay on their gross, and they may lose money, but they still got to pay based on their gross. It's a gross receipts tax, a business license tax. So a company generates $2 million in revenue, but have $2.5 million of expenses, they still got to pay taxes on the $2 million. So that is something that I think we need to be looking at. That was kind of the intent, was to say, hey, we've completely waived it for small businesses, you know, up to the 150, because I think that made a lot of sense for less filing in the Commissioner of Revenue's office. It was a small amount of money, less work for them, better business friendly. Now, if we look at those rates for the, you know, back to at least just that 650, I mean, that would mean you'd lower the rates by roughly 6.5%, and each rate is different, isn't it?
That's correct.
You have some rates that are 52 cents, some that are 9 cents, or
From 16 to 58.
16 to 58. And so if we lowered the as a percentage, those rates, it's then going to be across the board. So that's something I think we should still do, rather than just have an exemption higher, because that's, you know, the few businesses that would go from being exempt from 150 to 200,000. They'd appreciate not having to do anything. But the intent was to try to get a little more parity and try to bring down the rates on even the small, mid, and even big businesses. So they can, sort of encouraging that, as opposed to, why we tax cigarettes. We want to reduce that burden, so.
To frame that up, to help with the conversation, that reduction would be, the 650,000 would equate to a 6.19, 6.2% reduction. If we went forward with a 6.2% reduction as opposed to the $200,000 exemption, then essentially where we land is exactly where we started today, except all the reductions are back in. So instead of the $851,000 in budget cuts, you're at 1.4 million-ish. Right.
But that's assuming some of these other things.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
assuming
Correct.
that the budget cuts only applied to the city side.
Correct.
That none of the budget cuts applied to the school side, who had, I've been here a long time. We used to have 65,000 people in the city. We had 10,000 kids in the school system. We got 82,000 citizens in Lynchburg. We've got 7,400 in the school system. The city has had more work. The city side has had more elements, but some of these proposals that came thrown out there as though they were gospel and real, and we hear from the news and people saying, oh my goodness, you're cutting this, without even touching or addressing the side that has had a whole lot less service needed, because there is been a dramatic reduction in the number of students served. But yet we just kick it and say, hey, city side, you cut 3%, schools will even give you more, even though you have, again, less kids. So lots of these things are based on a fallacy of that presupposition that said we're only going to take it out of the city side, and all of these other remaining budgetary cuts on the city side, but still either the same, in spite of having, we're going to see more money from the state again this year. So that is where that needs to go. So if we do the 3% on the school side, that takes us back, instead of the 2023 as you proposed, takes us to last year's budget. Last year's local contribution of 40 or 39.5 million. That would be a better place. Then we don't have to worry about all these other cuts with an expanding city population, in spite of having a contracted school population. So I think you kind of focus the resources where you have the greater need. You don't focus more resources on the lesser need.
I've got something I've put together on the exactly what Councilman Ellison was talking about, but if nobody's got any more questions about that, I don't want to move forward into that before anybody's discussing this portion of what we're talking about.
And if we wanted to keep on talking about this, because I think Councilmember Faraldi alluded to it, with regarding the unassigned general fund balance, the excess unassigned fund balance. I know specifically the snow was like the 250,000, but the unspent, the amount, the excess unassigned fund balance, some of these items that could easily be funded with one-time money. With that excess fund balance, where we had last year, the $50 million surplus, which I recognize it's gone down a little bit, whether we're going to fund LRBA and a tree cutting contract, those are all one year. It's not an annual operation. It's easily done via one time the fund balance.
I would tend to agree to some point, realizing we'd have to balance that with capital improvement plan adjustments as to do we do some of those projects and initiatives as opposed to some of these. I would tend to agree, at least from a business alliance perspective for investment from the city. I can see and also agree with how the approach would be for it. Making that investment on an annual basis, not just operating, as it were. So I'd be in favor of utilizing as much of those funds to pay for one-time things, one-time funds for this budget. I think that does make sense to me.
Dr. Walden?
Did you finish, sir?
No, go ahead, sir.
again, looking at some of the remaining cuts, like for example, the Lynchburg Regional, Business Alliance. I mean, that's a major partner. So, I mean, I'm just saying, I'm just reiterating, we're a business-friendly community. We have got to make sure we include that in our budget. I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me. And also reducing the funding for the Miller Park Pool for 10 sessions, short by 10 days. I know the city manager had his budget to increase it by a couple of days, and now the plan is to reduce it by 10 days. There's not a lot of activities for our youth in our community during the summertime, and I was at a presentation at East Class today about the pools and about the challenge, especially for persons who don't have the opportunity to go to a private pool or a home pool or I think that they'd have more of a community pool and access, called access. I think Miller Pool gives them access, and it's really utilized a lot during the summertime. So it reduces by 10 days with all the crime we see in our community, the shootings we see in our community, and all the other issues facing our youth. We need to be seeing what we as a council can do to increase access for our youth as far as activities, as far as entertainment, to kind of keep them off the street versus shutting things down and kind of put them back on the streets. So Miller Park Pool is used extensively during the summertime. So I would hate to see that cut. I'm glad to see we open back up the Templeton Senior Citizen because we need to make sure our seniors have a place they can go to as well. So I'm glad to see that has been restored. I'm still not satisfied with the school situation as far as I'm seeing. What was it? Was it 40 for the schools? Can you go back to that? Yes, 40.8 million. Then I'm hearing, I think Councilman Jeff said 839 or something? 39. So it's going from 40 point, it's going, every time it goes down. So we need to see, we need to go, I prefer for it to go the other way versus from 40.8 to 39. I've heard your argument. I understand that the population of the schools has gone down. But just like everyone else, services have increased. And also, even the demand for services increased between all kind of population with situations, with special ed, with conditions of the buildings. Like even at the event today, one of the young ladies, I think the moderator asked a question to the kids, and the one girl said, don't waste money. They need to fix what's needed in the school. They said one of the pipes are leaking. This is even the AC glass. So one of the young ladies was very vocal about certain repairs that were needed at the school. So again, because of certain budget situations, I'm sure some things kind of get pushed aside. And there was a comment made about the situation at Payne that's overlooked. I think things are overlooked. I think you just kind of see what funding you have and kind of restructure certain funding, and sometimes you put things off, and then you come to situations. We talk about the prisoner pipeline situation, where we reduce funding in like education services, but increase funding for our police and our police department, which I totally agree that our responders need an increase, But I'm concerned about us sending that message out there that we're going to reduce education because our population's increased, but the service needs like more than ever. And we see it on a daily basis. And since January, we've seen 3 young people killed on our streets in Lynchburg. 3 killed. So again, not to mention all the other murders that have been going on in our city. So in order to reduce education, to me, this is not the time to do that. We just need to really see what we can do to support our schools, support our teachers, support all the city schools, the teacher staff, because that's just, being a teacher, it is so challenging. So we need to see what we can do to support them and support the school board budget as much as we possibly can. Maybe we can't do the whole, I think they asked for $6 million, I believe it was, at least do half or something. I just can't see reducing it by 3. For what we did last year. That just to me does not make sense. Thank you.
Anyone else for council questions?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
Before we jump into council questions information, it's my understanding staff needs guidance, and I also need guidance as to documentary prep as it relates to what City Council wants to do concerning its salaries related to closing the gap. As it relates to solely for fiscal year 24. As you all know, I'd sent some options for you all to consider and discuss if that's something you all would do today. Option 1 being waive city council salaries in their entirety for FY24, reduce city council salaries for FY24 by 3% or more. City councils voluntarily, where so moved, can individually donate part or all of their salaries to the city, or no action taken at all as it relates to city council salaries.
Okay.
No action. One, from the standpoint of when we're looking at this, we look at tax rates, not just how it affects our personal
how it affects the city. And so when we're looking at city council pay, I know it's usually a lot of times people don't like to talk about it because it affects us personally, but the reality is, what do you do for the city as a whole? I mean, it's what's going to happen when they're done? Nobody else going to want to do it? I mean, what's going to happen if just lots of people just, you know, and two, having the ability of somebody to donate? Hallelujah. You have that ability now. We got a free country. You can donate to the Godparent Home, you can donate to Blue Ridge Pregnancy Center, you can donate to the school initiative, Bridges to Progress, there's all your church, you got lots of availability to donate. But when you're thinking about these kind of decisions, I know it's uncomfortable to talk about, hey, you know, because it's personal, but the reality is this good policy? You know, I think before lots of you were here, there was a couple city managers ago, they did a presentation where city council actual salaries are like the lowest in the entire Commonwealth. I mean, some places have benefits and some have retirement, and, you know, so it's been great to work with so many people over the years that have given so much of their time, their talent, and their treasure to be here to look out for the citizens that elected them. You know, so I don't think this is something, you know, taking no action, I think is appropriate, because it does kind of put people saying, oh, this is about me. It shouldn't be about you. Just like we don't set the real estate tax rate just so I get to pay a little bit less in real estate, you know, or if a business license so I don't get to pay. Well, we're not doing it for the water rates so I can pay less water. We're affected, granted, but you want to think of how it affects the city as a whole. Do we want to have citizens that are going to come forward year after year to volunteer their time to serve and to be a legislative body that looks out for the benefits of the city? So,
Can you help with this? Yes, ma'am. What were those options, the first one again, I'm sorry?
The first one was the waiver of city council salaries in their entirety for fiscal year '24. The second.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, the first one
Yes,
was
sir.
waive it, just, so, when I read the first thing you said, it was to talk to our tax accountant and things of that nature, but the first was just a waiver, we wouldn't have to do anything else? No. So it wouldn't be appropriated, so we wouldn't receive it at all?
So it would be a waiver of your right to receive the salary by council action. So there isn't an appropriation being done as part of that ordinance, but it's a redirection of the salary to basically be put somewhere else in the budget to offset that gap.
So when we were waiving it, it wouldn't come up on our taxes, correct? We wouldn't get a W-2 form, nothing like that, correct, or what?
I can't really speak to the tax component, and I say that because it's not something I would really specialize or try to dabble in. So the idea is, what we're talking about is whether or not it's considered income. If it's still considered income because you're able to control it. So that's kind of why I had sent it out early, to give you all an opportunity to reach out to your folks to talk to them about it.
That's why I got a little confused about that part. If we're not receiving it, why would it still be income? Am I missing a piece there?
Because you chose to divert it somewhere else.
Okay.
So it'd still be considered income to you, but it'd be like making a donation back to the city of those funds.
So
So
we
it'd
still
be-
like a W-2 form for that amount?
Yes, but then you could do a charitable contribution on your taxes to offset that.
Okay. Okay.
I'll just be candid, if I may, I'm not inclined to, oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, that's.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Helgeson has said often that this is a volunteer, he's a volunteer.
Basically,
I volunteered my whole life, I never got paid for it. And I think that, another thing you say is that, the city has to tighten their belts, and I think we can demonstrate to the city that we really believe that, put our money where our mouth is, and tighten our belts by giving up our salary, and I think I would gladly do that, and I would really support that, and I think if we could direct it, I'd probably direct it to go to our clerk of consul's office so she can get the things that she needs to run that office efficiently. So, no-brainer for me.
I appreciate the comments from Councilmember Nolan. Unfortunately, not all of us are in a position where we could spread off those taxes. Candidly, I appreciate the direction and I want to honor it. But I'm not inclined to pay for taxes on income that I didn't receive. I mean, I think anybody who would be looking at this would be also inclined to the same. I would offer a solution would be to reduce council pay to a certain degree, as opposed to cutting it outright. 20%, 10%, 30%, doesn't matter to me. However, I don't believe it is a good practice for us to put a financial burden on members of council to do this job. You know, some folks may know I'm in a bit of a career change. If I did 2 deals in the career field I'm looking to go to, that equates to the money that this salary is, and that kind of shows it's really not a lot. But if this year we're talking about cutting it entirely, and then next year it goes back up to 10, does it stay back down at 0, stay up at 7? There's an election next year. Folks are planning to run for an office that may not pay them at all, and a lot of us have to work. You know, I know you're shrugging your shoulders, but you know, if I was in a position like you or others in certain aspects of the community, this wouldn't be a problem. But that's just not the case for me and my family. So I hope this council can really approach this from a truthful place where we recognize we're looking to make adjustments across the city departments. The percentage-wise, maybe the largest cut should be to us, but I don't think cutting it entirely is really wise, in my humble opinion.
Sorry, Councilman Missions.
Yeah, I kind of going on what the Vice Mayor said. I would actually like to see another option that we put, I guess, probably by ordinance, something in place where any pay changes for city council don't take effect until the next council. That way we can prevent the ultra wealthy and the elite in this room from using that as a political gimmick in the budget process. And that's just my personal consideration with that. So I think if there's increases in council salary, they cannot take effect until the next council. Is that correct?
Yeah, maybe for school board, I'd have to look and see if it's specific
So
to city council.
that's the option that I would like to see, because we don't want to take away access to city council from folks that are just regular middle class folks that want to come in here and serve their citizens and do it well. This shouldn't be something that's just for the wealthy or the elite. And if we completely eliminate the pay, it's not worth the time. Time is money, right? So for a lot of folks, they're just not going to be able to shoulder that burden. And in addition to that, I can tell you I'm not interested in paying taxes on income that I don't receive. That's just a position that I don't think anybody would want to put themselves in. So those are my considerations. You know, I could lean towards if people wanted to do their individual salaries, that, you know, their individual choice, that's fine.
And isn't that 3 where it can be then? Isn't that what you have on here, option 3?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, you can already do that by right, by just, it's, you know, the beauty of America is people have property rights, so when they get paid, they have the ability to give their money wherever they'd like to. And so now you're saying that if we, you know, more codify it with option 3, that somebody can say, hey, I want it to go to a city department, you know, so. Yeah, and the interesting thing is, if you remember on this budget, what we just saw at the beginning, we saw some pretty dramatic salary increases that we're proposing. I mean, across the board, 5% increases. We're not saying, hey, let's do the same thing for council. I mean, we're doing some pretty significant increases for public safety with the, either 3 or 4 is just, I think we need to spend our time on, you know, finishing this up rather than, you know, posturing, I think, but.
Next. Mr. Wilder?
You have a comment?
No, there's no point. No point.
Okay, so if we reduce the amount, to say a reduction of, say, 80%, so would we just receive 80% of what we currently receive now? Would we still pay tax on the 80% we do not receive? So we just,
receive it, just the amount you receive is what you would pay taxes.
okay, all right. So
There
to-
may be I'd have to look at the code section again, but there may be a minimum that you all would be eligible for. So I guess the idea would be is if you were going to reduce it, what I would suggest proposing the ordinance is the minimum, if it didn't go below that. And no, I mean, it would just be an uncodified ordinance like this effective for this particular fiscal year, and you would pay taxes on what you're actually paid.
Okay, so could I see what the minimum is then? At the next meeting, I guess, whatever?
Sure.
Just so I know what the minimum is.
I'm actually pulling it up right now.
Okay. Yep. And then, because if anybody needs it, I'm probably the least paid person in here. I run a nonprofit, so I know I'm probably the least person in here. But I'm willing to. I don't feel comfortable in knowing the needs of our schools and knowing the needs of so many other programs and the Business Alliance and so many other groups. I just don't even feel comfortable. That's why I've been more than happy to say reduce it about 80%, and give this discretion to our leadership team and where those funds would go to. And we can cherry pick and this, put it here, put it there. At some point you got to let the executives make those decisions and go from there. I just don't want to nitpick every decision. My God, I mean, it just be a little overwhelming sometimes. I'm sorry, it's just overwhelming. My Lord, excuse me, Jesus.
If I have this right, it's code section 15.2-1414.6, and that's if I have it right. I don't see anything related to a minimum. In fact, there's just a maximum based off population size. The maximum for the city of Lynchburg, based off population, would be $23,000. And to Councilmember Missions, it does say no increase in the salary of any member of council shall take effect until July 1 after the next regularly scheduled general election of council members. So that's already covered on that front.
Thank you.
And I'm sure Mr. Friedman will correct us if I looked at the wrong one.
Yeah, no, that family of statutes is the correct area. So certainly I could present something if there was a percentage you all wanted to consider reducing the salaries by for the next meeting for you all to look at if it's.
Let's do commensurate with the reduction in the city attorney's office. How about that? Let's do that
3%?
same percentage. Huh?
The 3%?
No, as far as the compensation. Let's do that the same. So let's, I think we're spending a lot of time. Let's move on.
So I know we need to decide about what's going to happen here, whether we do the $1.3 million department cuts that were proposed last week, now that we've gotten clarification on the B poll, or if the money's coming from the school. So I would like us to have clarification there, because I know you need to have things ready for next Tuesday, obviously. With that said, if we, or whoever decides, if the department cuts are restored and the people decide that the cuts then go to the schools, what happens with, because I've asked last week and I think we can discuss it now, with our clerk's piece of the budget, because I don't think that was in the 1.3 as far as we're still kind of missing her piece of the budget, and I think that was the question I asked specifically about. That's still unaccounted for, correct?
Correct. How much was that?
I think Alicia was going to ask Meg.
Yeah, I got, so the number I got today was outside of council salaries, there was still $55,000 that was needed for the part-time position she requested, and the transcriptionist service is $55,000.
So if we were to restore all the cuts, so that's the department cuts, the city council salaries, and the discretionary service providers, that would mean we would need to take 1.3 $1,426,000 from school's budget. If you wanted to add on top of that, the funding for the clerk, it would be another, did we say 50, 55, 50? So it would be roughly 475 million, almost 1.5 million.
I thought you said that number was reduced with the change in people.
It is, but now we're thinking, we put it back in.
Put it back
Yeah,
in?
because it was a misunderstanding between two. Okay, so with that said, depending on how the discussion goes, I would like a couple things noted for the record. One is, I would really like it if we avoided making statements that are accusatory or ugly in nature about elitist or whatever remarks, because I think it's just unnecessary. I do know we have a governor who's donated his salary. We've had previous presidents who've donated their salaries. And I think it's just, if people want to donate things, it's fine, and we shouldn't name call and whatever they choose to do, because if anybody here chooses to do that now, it's going to be received like it's done in an effort to look better than others, and I don't think that's a good way to make people feel if they chose to do that. And if we're looking out for our clerk and trying to find a way to help her services be met because she is crucial to us, I don't want anybody here to feel bad about doing that, or anybody here that chooses not to do that to feel bad that they couldn't do that or chose not to. I respect everyone's financial position on council and everyone's choice to do whatever they want to do. We are all public servants. I don't think anybody chose to be council members because of the pay. We know our state officials do not get paid a lot for what they do, and they work really hard. So I don't think anybody's here for the pay. And I know we all do work really hard for this job. And the citizens do get a lot from us and deserve a lot from us. So with that said, before we move on, Councilman Taylor.
Yes. What would it take to fund the Business Alliance and Alicia? Where can we find those dollars at 89 cents? Can we?
We can.
Okay, so then I just think I think what I would like to see is, by the end of the meeting, that we have direction, solid direction to figure out how how the majority of council decides to go, so that Mr. Benda knows what he's doing, so that he has something to work with next Tuesday, and that we can have a solid plan in place that includes our clerk's needs. And again, if any council members decide that they want to donate their salaries or whatever, they have the right to do that and not feel bad about it. Can we move on?
Madam Mayor, before
Yes.
we do move on, so it sounds like the direction that council's going to be going is to do a voluntary donation if they so choose. But I have an issue with Councilman Helgeson's comment to me about saying to take it out of or to reduce it by the amount of the city attorney's office. I believe that's retaliatory. What I would submit,
I'm just saying that.
Councilman Helgeson.
People were saying, oh, well, that point was that we're having an increase in city compensation.
Councilman Helgeson, I had offered information to this council to be able to get legitimate direction for staff and myself in preparing documents. I just wanted to note that for the record. I don't appreciate being spoken to that way
So you had an increase, though?
penalized
No,
in
it's an
some
increase.
fashion.
It's an increase. My point was, it's an increase. And we spent a lot of time on this, a whole lot more than having that resolution that took about a minute and a half, the ordinance, for the 89-cent rate.
Councilman Helgeson,
So
let's keep it
that's what.
on the subject,
Yep.
and duly noted. Thank you, Mr. Friedman. I appreciate that. So I believe Councilman Mischens wanted to move on to something about the schools, but before that, did anybody else have anything to offer? Mr. Taylor, Councilman Taylor, did you have anything to offer? Did we need to make a decision right now on anybody with the pay, or do we want to wait and see what things look like before we decide that at the end? Do y'all just want to wait and see how this goes?
You back, one more, sorry. And one more, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I would again say I would like to see those dollars from the remaining service cuts to be filled with, instead of doing, focus on the most critical projects with the one-time dollars, and the rest be allocated as best as possible for these, with emphasis on the Alliance, and to Councilmember Wilder's point, the pool and some other things, but that would be my 2 cents, so to speak.
Anyone else?
I guess the one thing, the elimination of those external service providers, they're discretionary. I think those need to stay as a reduction. So some of those were pretty voluntary, and we vote on those individually. And it's a small dollar amount, it's $30,000 on a, $235 million general fund budget, so I think it's fairly small. But the external service providers do require a supermajority, I think, since we're giving away tax dollars to separate organizations. So having those in there, I think, is a good reduction. So, but it's only 30,000, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. So.
Dr. Wilder.
I can't remember all of those discretionary funds, but they provide services to the city. So I do have a question. I have some uncertainty about that.
And those come up when we vote on
Yes.
them. So.
But,
Why don't we get through this presentation?
Yes.
And then once that's done, we'll kind of go through those items. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So the elephant in the room, obviously, is the school budget. We've been talking about that for quite some time. I know that there's been a interest expressed in doing categorical funding, so we got to figure out how to get there, right? So the easiest thing to do is go through the easiest things first, right? At $42,145 on the request for the agency submitted, which you'll see in the blue, for facilities, I would say that we honor that request for that category. We talked about pupil transportation being an issue. I think that we should honor that full request for that category as well. We missed other non-instructional operations was in here as well. So these two are categories: facilities and other non-instructional operations, fully funded for those requests, fully funded for transportation. Now, when we're looking at operation and maintenance, now I understand that total operation and maintenance number at the bottom, if we give that to city schools, they go spend it how they see fit under operation and maintenance. We have to have a method to get there. So the way that I looked at all of this was, with the exception of personnel services and employee benefits, carrying everything over at the requested amount in the submission from city schools for 2024. So the only change here, going from $12,718,000 down to $12,412,000, is increasing the personnel services category by 5%, with a corresponding increase in benefits based on how that's multiplied out in the FY24 budget. So if our city employees are getting a 5% general wage increase across the board for non-sworn, I think that is, kind of acceptable for our school employees as well. Same thing with technology, same method went in there, 5% increase to personnel services and associated employee benefits. So we are more than the current budget of 2023, a little bit less than the ask for 2024, and we come with a number for $5.5 million for that. So this is the elephant in the room right here. The instruction operating request was $83 million. And that is a almost $10 million increase to what we had last year, or the current budget, excuse me, and even larger when you look at the only year that we know what we actually spent right now is FY22, because we had an audit, so we know what the actual dollars spent in FY22 were. So where do we end up with instruction? Well, we know it's going to be more than the $73.1 million, but what is that amount? But I would still consider that we carry forward those purchase services, internal services, other charges, and material supplies, tuition payments, joint operations, and capital outlay at what they requested for FY24. Something interesting to note here, when you look at this slide, this is from the FY22 audit. Brown Edwards, I think, does that for us. And I just found it kind of interesting when you look at that instruction line item, that in FY22, we spent $82.4 million, which included $13 million of federal aid that's not part of the school operating budget, and then another $1 million of school activities that's not part of the operating budget. So going back one slide, $82.5 million there, $83 million request. I just find that kind of interesting, seeing that the new local operating request matches what was spent, including the federal funding in '22. So how do we get there? We got to solve for X, right? So one thing we know is constant is we know what the teachers got paid. We know what the principals got paid. We know what the assistant principals got paid. And we know what total instruction compensation is because we have an audit for FY22. So those are 4 things that we know. What we have to find out is what's in the middle, right? So how do we get there? We know the teacher FTEs. That's all in the stuff that they sent us. That's where all the data comes from. We know what the average teacher compensation is for Lynchburg City Schools because they submitted data to the Virginia Department of Education, which they published in January. So we're able to multiply those FTEs by that average salary to get there. Same thing going down. So when we look at this, you'll see that in '22, and we've got roughly 620 FTEs for teachers, 19 for principals, 17 for assistant principals. Carries over to '23. I'm recommending for '24 that we increase the teacher FTEs by 3 because of something that Vice Mayor Feraldi brought up in the joint school board meeting, saying if they identify a student need, we should be moving to look to fund that student need. That should be the first thing that we are concerned about in the school division, right? And again, as I said, it's just getting to a method to fund those categories, right? So we have a number that we can come up with to do categorical funding. Now, the interesting thing on the bottom is when you look at the average teacher compensation, there was a major drop between FY22 and FY23, and that is coming from the state's data. And then you look at the difference in spending between the 2 years, we had $44.4 million that we know we spent in FY22 because it's in the audit. And then we have $48.5 million that we're budgeted to spend this year. So the real question is, what happened between FY22 and '23, right? Teacher pay, according to the Lynchburg City Schools' own data that they gave to the Virginia Department of Education that they published in January, on January 10th, shows that average teacher pay decreased 8.4% coming into the fiscal year that we're in right now in this school year. So what we know that happened was at the beginning of the last budget, we had a 5% increase for teachers, right? So we're looking at an 8.4% increase when we know we budgeted for a 5% increase because that was authorized in the state budget, and I believe there was a local match here as well in that previous council. So when you look at it that way, it's even bigger delta because we were supposed to be going up 5%, but instead of going up 5%, we went down 8.4%. Something else we know, this is from a March 19th, March 21st school board work session. There was 185 certified staff resignations in that school year covered by fiscal year 23, or excuse me, fiscal year 22. So in that school year, during the budget preparation, they had all of these people, right? They were there while they were preparing the budget for FY23. And then when you look at the exit data of teacher resignations by year, you can see that the 21-22 school year was far and above the highest. And during that fiscal year, budget process occurs in the third quarter for the current fiscal year that we're in. The other thing you'll see here is that's showing you by experience the teachers that left. If you look at that purple bar at the top, it's hard to see because it's really small, but those are teachers with 9 or more years in service. So those are your more high-paid teachers, teachers that have been around for a while. So what we know, there was a historic wave of certified staff resignations in the 21-22 school year, and that average teacher pay decreased 8.4% in fiscal year 23, while we had an approved 5% pay increase in the budget. So if you carry the numbers that we know, what that looks like is in fiscal year 22, teachers were paid $32 million. Principals were paid 1.6, assistant principals 1.1. Total compensation under personnel services was 44.4. And the X in the middle, that's everybody else that's in that instruction bucket. That's your instructional assistants. That's your, I think there's some counseling and behavioral specialists in there. That is also roughly 30 or more high-paid administrators, okay? And then when we come over to FY23, with the same number of FTEs, because we're looking at FTEs, these are not, this does not factor for vacancies, so this is fully funding every teacher position, right? That decreased by 2.7 million based on the data that Lynchburg City Schools gave the Virginia Department of Education, right? We follow that down, and we had a 70% increase in X, which is everybody else. So what I'm thinking, and this is just an assumption right here, and I know that Deputy City Manager Patrick and I talked about this earlier, is that's the number that needs to be explained in FY23. A logical assumption would be they prepared the FY23 budget with a much higher amount of senior teachers. They had 185 staff resignations. They replaced them with new teachers, and that resulted in driving down that average teacher pay, right? So they're spending light in instruction right now on teachers. That just makes sense. Not a mistake, not an error. They did a good budget. They planned accordingly for 5% increases, and then, boom, all those teachers left. It's an unfortunate thing, and it's something that we have to try to stop moving forward because we want those teachers to stay, and that's what we got. So then we need to figure out what we're going to do in 24, which you'll see in the column to the right, and I'll show you how I got there. So how I got there was increasing the FTEs by 3 to 622.35 and increasing average teacher pay to $54,410. That's a 15% increase. That would also be based off the current base of $43,470. I think that would bring that, a 15% increase for that base teacher would come to $49,986. It's pretty close to $50,000 a year. If you push that average teacher pay up to $54,400 with a 15% increase in personnel services for the teacher FTEs, 5% for the principals and assistant principals, and because that X range, which is the additional instructional staff, is so, it ranges from IAs, which need to be brought up, to high-paid administrators, which probably don't need to be brought up to IAs. There was a little bit of, I'll just call it magic, that I worked in there with some more information that I have, and I landed on 11.2% increase in that number, so we can make sure we try to get as many of those IAs and some of those folks up to $15 an hour as possible. And we end up with a 1.9% increase to a FY23 expenditure budget that's probably going to result in a fund balance because of all the experienced teachers that left, but an 11.3% increase over what we know we spent in FY22, because we know what we spent because it's been audited. So then when you look at that, this is what that comes out to be. $74,170,808 for instruction. The factor that I use to multiply the benefits is the same factor in the submitted 24 budget, because what I don't know is if there were any percentage changes in any of the benefits. So I'm using the factor for the FY24 benefit package on the funding proposal for FY24. The other side of this is we're removing $1 million and reallocating it from administration to instruction. When you go through the CAFR, you'll look that there was about $1 million in federal funding. So we're bringing the administration budget kind of more in line with what was actually spent in '22 and not what they put in for '23, but we're making that classroom a priority by reallocating just a little bit of those funds over into instruction to accomplish this. And at the end, what that looks like, when you put a teeny little bit of a buffer on that, all the way on the far right side, is what you'll see here, which is an overall budget for Lynchburg City Schools with $109,177,663 based on the category buckets. That's a $2.9 million increase over the total funding for FY23. It's also a 9.1% increase, or a $6.2 million increase in funding over what we know we spent in FY22. And in FY22, average teacher salaries were 8.4% higher than they are right now. So we are going much higher than FY22 when the teacher pay was higher. We're also going to put another, I'm proposing that we put another category in there, which is contingency reserves. I know we discussed this, the Deputy City Manager and myself, that we are allowed to appropriate to a contingency reserve category according to the Code of Virginia. And that is to prepare for a potential of the skinny budget being passed in the General Assembly, which looks like about 2.3 million increase state funding, and that 1.8 million would cover the gap if the full 4.5 million from the state doesn't come, so that we've got that covered. So there would be, if there was a decrease in state funding based on what's projected, we've got a contingency reserve established that we could cover that gap. And where we end up with that is 1.4 million additional dollars for the city side of the budget. So based on the B-poll conversation previously, what we're looking at is something a little different here, but easily we're going to be able to restore those department budget and service level reductions, the elimination of city council salaries, the eliminated funding, we can restore all that. And we would even have plenty of funding to add the Department of Internal Audit back into the city with an additional $433,000 left. So that's it. Those are my proposals for categorical funding for Lynchburg City Schools. And what it shows when you look at the numbers is if we put the work into it and figure out what we're doing, we can give city schools plenty of money to appropriately pay their staff. Plenty of money to appropriately pay their staff. It's just their choice what they do with it and how they carry it forward.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, Dr. Weiler?
Has the city school seen this?
They're going to.
No, I said, have they?
They're going to. We talked about, the Deputy City Manager and I talked about that.
But they haven't seen it yet.
They have not.
Oh, Lord. Excuse me, Lord. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't feel comfortable in presenting information that the school system is responsible for that they haven't been a part of. It's almost like I'm coming to your house. I'm gonna take your budget and just redo your whole budget and say, forget you. I'm gonna just give you the budget and this is how you're gonna spend it. You know, we have a superintendent, we have a county staff over there, we have a person who's been doing it for years, we have a school board that we have appointed to oversee all this process, but yet we're taking that process away from them ourselves and saying, you're gonna spend this dollar here, this dollar here, this dollar here. I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't feel like that's fair. I think the school system, to me, I don't think it's fair to just do this right now, doing a scoop, and they're having a meeting themselves, and we just say, here's what we're going to do, and this is how you're going to live with it. I don't think that's proper. I don't think that's fair. I think something like this has been presented to them first. Say, this is where our thoughts are, and then also it may be because I'm not in that I don't have enough time to get that detailed into all of this conversation with them. It seems like they should have been a part of that conversation. If we want to be fair, if we want to be transparent, I think we should have a conversation with them before we present this information so they can see this is our thinking, this is our category funding strategy. What are your thoughts? And there's so many things that those persons who are embedded with it as a daily job, who do this on a daily basis for 20 plus years or 50 years or whatever the case may be, who do it on a consistent basis, might say, oh, you're not considering this, or you're not considering that. I think it would be, to me, more fair to present this to them ahead of time and say, this is what our thinking is. Are we missing any concepts? Is there any accounting strategy that we don't know about, or a certain funding strategy that we haven't considered before we present this to a whole community? We have TV, you have news here. I'm going to present something to them first, to be fair, to say, is our thinking correct as a transparency, and to be fair to them before we just come up with some assumptions. When you make assumptions, I'm just saying that to me is not fair. So I would have liked to have seen this presented to the school system first, get their input, and say, this is where we're going, this is our thinking. And also, we have a school board and a school administration staff that's in charge of the budget. We're to be micromanaging them and tell them exactly where the fund's gonna go, and you're gonna spend money in this category, and here, this is it.
May I respond, Madam Mayor?
Thank you. I do have a quick question, and yes, I will use one question. Will there, did you have time, because I think Councilman Mischens did have time to talk to you before this meeting. Were you able to kind of confirm any of this information during that meeting with him?
Confirm
Or verify it?
Verify it, no. Here's what I would say. I think Councilman Mischens has pulled a lot of data together. And has raised a lot of really interesting questions. But we don't know what we don't know, right? Okay. And with anything like this, I think it's important that schools has an opportunity to weigh in, kind of provide some of the context to some of the questions that Councilman Mischens has raised. I think what I have found in using data to prepare budgets for 10, 15 years now is data's a great place to start, but there's often a lot of things that there's stories and context that the data just can't provide, and it's critical that we allow schools an opportunity to view this and to weigh in on the impact it would have on their operations if we went forward with this. But
and I do appreciate the hard work you obviously put into this. So I just wanted to ask before you speak, when you think you'll have a chance to get it. Do you think that you'll have a chance to get it in front of the schools before next Tuesday, I guess?
I would be able to email this out to everybody here and then also the school division this evening. That would be no problem. And I think that they should take a look at it because there are some interesting questions there. And it's like I said, when I presented this, we only know what we know. There's a massive amount of teacher resignations, right? And then the school division reported an 8.4% lower average teacher salary for the fiscal year we're in. Those are the only two things that we really know coming from their own information. And, to some of Councilmember Wilder's points, that this is basically the compilation of all the data that they have given us in the budget process plugged into one place. That's what this is. And then adding the VDOE data to it. That was the final piece that made it make sense. Now, if that VDOE data is wrong, well, then it was submitted wrong because it said in the disclaimer in there that that data was prepared based on submissions by the local school divisions. So the data that went to VDOE for Lynchburg's average salaries came from Lynchburg City Schools. So this is just a compilation of all that. One thing that I will say that I didn't appreciate was the locked down read-only spreadsheets that the school division kept sending us, trying to make it more challenging on us to analyze the information. I just don't appreciate that. It seems like, and I know I've had conversations with Donna about this, that it's sometimes it's hard to get information out of the school division. It has been previously. And I just don't appreciate that. And I think that there needs to be some sort of answer for what's going on right now in the current budget. Why is average teacher pay down 8.4% on the heels of a 5% budget approved pay increase? And are we running, you know, a quote-unquote fund balance or surplus over there right now because of that, or is that money being moved around and spent elsewhere? And I think that when you look at it like this, and I understand what Councilmember Wilder said, but when I look at it like this confirms for me why we need to do categorical funding, right? Because right now, in the current fiscal year budget, they can take that money and move it anywhere. So if they truly are running 70% hot and everything but teachers, principals, and assistant principals on salary and instruction in the school division, right now they have the authority to take that and move it anywhere and use it however they want to, right? And I would say that if we do the categorical funding, what that is going to allow us to do is make sure that there is an emphasis on the classrooms, make sure that there is an emphasis on properly compensating our educators, make sure that there is an emphasis on keeping them safe in the school buses and making sure that our bus drivers are getting properly compensated. I think that is something we can do. And, you know, I think this just confirms the need to do categorical funding is what it comes down to.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Dolan?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Councilmember Missions, I think you answered the question, though, I believe, when you said, about the average salary going down, but then you pointed out that we lost all these teachers that were experienced, 9 and 10 years of experience, hiring new ones, so that automatically would mean that average would go down. I think you said that.
Absolutely, yes.
In your data. So why would you use that as a criteria for
Which part?
promoting the category funding? I mean, you're
right
hinging
now-
everything on this fact that the
Yes.
salary have gone down,
Right.
the average, but it would, because
Because right now, if they're running a quote-unquote surplus, if they're not spending the money that they originally planned to spend on instruction, they could move it around and spend it elsewhere.
well, they should have done that, yeah, I
And-
agree with that.
And so they can do that, where if we wanted to make sure, because the reality is, when you look at that, right, and you look at what was spent in the previous year and what was appropriated for this year, they could actually have bumped up the average teacher salary of $56,000 this year, right? So the reality is, they could have already given the teachers a pay increase this year, right? If that stuff were all to shake out, if that X were to be what that X is, and they're not spending that 70%, if they're not spending that additional 70%, when they saw that massive change in the salaries because of all the experienced teachers that left and all the new ones that came in, well, then why are they beating the drum about this plan that they might actually have the money to implement a portion of or most of right now? So to come and then ask for an additional 10 million for instruction on top of that, because the ask right here, the ask for instruction was 83 million. And, you know, and I just think that is way too high. And I'll throw the disclaimer out there. My wife is a school teacher in Lynchburg City Schools, and I can weigh in on this objectively and fairly and impartially, because this impacts the community at large and all the teachers in the school division. But, you know, there's something that happened in there. There's some extra money in there, and I would just like to know what's going on with that.
Thank you. You know, when we look at this, because we've all known, we've kind of heard it anecdotally and whatnot about the, can you back up to your 185 resignations? I mean, that was a lot of people. And you know, we're kind of looking at, you know, all the different reasons. And when you have a big reason as other, that means people don't want to say. You know, you kind of look at what some of these reasons are. You know, I think a lot of the other has been the fact of, you know, getting tired of getting chairs thrown at you and lack of a discipline. The beauty of this budget, and I'm glad, thank you, Councilmember Mischens, for going over this in the detail, because the beauty of this budget is we're doing lots of things that we said we wanted to do. We wanted to lower the tax burden on our citizens. We wanted to increase public safety pay. We wanted to actually improve schools. And when you're actually targeting the schools, that isn't going to just this big other category, but it's actually going to instruction, and recognizing that we're going to have a new school board this summer that is going to be able to implement this. That's pretty good. I mean, that's a fantastic time that we'll have a new school board that's going to say, here's the budget they requested, here's the budget that council had to actually fund on the different categories where we're giving more to the classroom, giving less to the bureaucracy and the administration, focusing on making sure the kids can get to school efficiently and safely by the transportation asset they had. I think this works very well because I know there's, when I've watched these other budgets or the other categories, I think you had a line in there, the other. Can you get back to your other? Wherever that was. That was, look, yeah, right there. I mean, going from 9.5 to 16, and, you really kind of question is some of these grant positions that are now being backfilled operationally, as opposed to the funding by the grants. And so, I think this is where the budget, by the time we're done, I think everybody's going to be, it was no fun getting there because there's lots of things that say, oh, we're cutting this, we're cutting that, we're not doing this, we have to, do all these different things. The reality is allocating the resources that we have efficiently, effectively, to the best interests of our citizens. I think this would be a great budget. And so, thank you for all the work. I mean, this is good to see. You see these DOE report, the Virginia Department of Education reports for a long time. I forwarded some of the salary studies to Greg. When you look at our ratios and our staffing ratios, and if we do this budget appropriately, we don't have to take it all out from the city side. I mean, I think here is where I think Councilmember Mistrin said the elephant in the room. Here's where it is, and especially it makes anecdotal sense when you've seen the school system declined from 10,000 students down to 7,400. The same time while the city population has grown from 65,000 to 82,000. You don't cut it on the city side, you actually make sure, so anyway, lots of things that we can do. I think this would make a lot of sense. It frees up where we don't have to make all those cuts. And we can still do some of those. I think wouldn't be a bad idea. Some of the things we can still probably do as one time. But we're on our way.
And speaking to Councilman Hosen said, one thing that I also demonstrated this with Greg is that when I started pulling all this data into one spreadsheet, different sources of data started validating each other, right?
Yep.
So we were talking like FTEs, I was within not one digit, I was within the 10th of a whole, right? So when you start looking at pulling from the different sources of data that we were provided, what VDOE has, and all of those things, all those different sources of data began to validate each other. And I want to thank the Vice Mayor from the joint meeting. Why wasn't the student need first, right, when it came to funding instruction? The 3 additional teachers' positions. I think it was 2 math teachers and do you remember? Yeah, it was 2 math teachers. I looked at it. It was 2 math teachers and something else. That should be the priority of our school division, is funding student needs first. And I think that that's the priority that this city council can take, and making sure that we lock in the appropriate level of funding to make sure that our teachers can be compensated appropriately and that the money is in the classroom where it belongs.
Just one last thing to add, since I've been here a long time, and Donna's been here a long time. Lots of times we just get stuff from schools, and we just kind of take it as gospel, without actually looking at it. I remember Donna and even her predecessor, Mike, before, would say, well, it's hard to get stuff. I mean, you'd ask for what are the SOQ funded positions, and 3 months later you may get something. And so we've seen those challenges, and we've seen that kind of maybe a little more lax, and it's sad to see 185 teachers have have left just recently, especially those with experience. And we need to figure out how to keep them, how to pay them to do their job in the classroom so they can educate our kids and improve our test scores. I think this is a great first step.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Pearldy.
To offer my insight, I do thank the council member for putting the legwork into putting this together. Whether or not it does line up with what City Hall says and what central office says, I think that does remain to be seen, at least from my perspective, absent knowing where the revenues, the flow of cash falls. I know that doing the same thing over and over again, I don't believe has gotten us to where we as a community want to be, which is, I often say prioritizing the classroom. Others would say teacher pay. There's no question in my mind that Lynchburg should be a leader in teacher pay for our region. And I have said I believe the money is there. If this lines up, that means we can be. And so I hear the concern of trying something different, but we've been doing school funding one way for so long that maybe we do need to be looking at something different. I'm looking at my friends who are teachers in the school system and seeing what path for financial success do they have over the next 15 years. Someone who I disagree politically on many fronts with, who had a great conversation a couple weeks ago, and that person told me what they were making after 25 years, and I'm just like, I can't get over that. That shouldn't be what's happening in Lynchburg. And yet here we are. And so my hope is that if these line up and we can move forward with a path, either this one specifically or another one just like it, people should be coming to Lynchburg City Schools because that's where they can be successful and as a family and financially so. And I think this gets us moving in that direction. So I'm willing to try something different. If that means that the school board is, I appreciate the comment, but unfortunately, the comment of, it should have been shared with the schools first. Maybe so. I also would have liked to have the school division not submit a budget that would have equated to a 15 cent, 10 cent, 8 cent, 9 cent tax increase on the real estate rate in one of the most economically challenging times in 15 years. I mean, if we're calling balls and strikes, I think that's a fair assessment. So from my perspective, that's generally the direction I am inclined to go with in us taking the bull by the horns and saying this is where we want our treasure to be.
One thing if I could add to what he said made me think, we had a lot of public comment when you were gone. One lady who has been at the school for a long time, she said she's been teaching for 15 years, but she's been at Lynchburg for 8 to 10 years. And she said her pay went up $80. And so I'm sitting there going like, I've been on council the whole time. Council has allocated millions more dollars. How in the world, and she's saying, oh, that's why we need to raise the taxes higher. And I'm saying we need to allocate what we got to the classroom. She was $80 more, $80 or $90 more in this period of time. It's like, that was an old day. That's the way they did it before. We got a new day. We're doing it different. And I'm very thankful for a new day. I think our teachers are going to be thankful for this new day. I know our city's going to be thankful, our citizens. It's making sausage, but it's a new day, and those are going to change. When she said that, I couldn't believe it. I was like, you've been there that long, and you're saying that the problem is not enough tax revenue? The problem is allocation of prioritizing spending to what's important. So.
Absolutely. I can speak to that because my wife's an educator. She got hired in 2007, and I know teachers that got hired there before her that are not making that $50,000 a year yet. And I can tell you right now, the way they came out hot and heavy with this 50 and 15 plan for the new teachers really was insulting to a lot of the veteran teachers that have been there many years, because they're the ones that have been left behind. They're the 180, a big chunk of the 185 that have left, right? And I think it's just so important. Yeah, we need to raise the starting pay for teachers, absolutely. There's not a doubt in my mind. But we need to focus on taking care of our veteran teachers and our highly trained, highly skilled educators, and making sure that they're invested in.
Vice Mayor Feraldi?
What do you need from us as it relates to this data and how it works?
I think we've got it. Next Tuesday is our first reading. What I hear from the table, and correct me, we're at 89 cents. That does the things that we showed, that does 5% GWI with public safety. And then if there's agreement to level fund schools at 39 and some change, the reductions, you asked about Alicia and you asked about some other LRBA, those would go off the table. So those are then taken care of. So we would prepare ordinances.
Forgive me for being
sorry.
a bit anal. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Off the table, taken care of as to say what?
Meaning where we were having to find reductions here to bridge that gap. If you decide to use the 3-point-something million from schools and fund them at the, I forget what year it was. 22. If you fund it at 22, those reductions that have been proposed by the city to meet that gap are then taken care or funded by the school component.
Sorry, I just
No,
want to make sure.
Sorry, make sure I'm clear.
No, that's okay.
So that's where.
So let's, can we pause there for a minute?
Yes, ma'am.
Then I need to know, as a consensus from council, if that is, okay, so there's two options here. If the proposal that Councilman Admissions just gave, and he presents it to the schools, and they come back and say, data is correct, you're right.
It's their data.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And if it matches, then what you're saying is there's a 1.4 million positive amount that would have then basically taken care of the department cuts.
They're gonna probably fight us on pulling a little bit out of administration, but I think we need to prioritize the classroom and take a little check back on what we're funding in Lynchburg City Schools administration.
I fully expect there to be arguments left and right on what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Frankly.
So we need to decide basically if what we're directing Winter to do, depending on what the schools come back with. Are we directing him? Well, is the direction that we're directing him level funding from 22? That's what.
I mean, makes a lot of sense. All the budget presentations were, again, with an expanding populace in the city versus a decreasing populace in the city school system. And you don't just take it all from, the city side without, so I'm glad we got that one, hopefully at bay.
And I think when you look at this slide right here, right, we know the budgeted teacher compensation for those 619.35 positions for the current fiscal year is $2.7 million less than it was in 22, right? And when we're looking at that 39.5.
And just one last quick thing, if I can, on that, on the 39 and a half, that's also assuming that there is a skinny budget of the state of 2.4 million.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, isn't it the state local money gonna go probably as high as 6? But it's at least gonna be 4.5, I
There's
imagine, right?
1.8 million built in for reserve.
It's not gonna be, is it gonna be 2 but just a couple of weeks, but I mean, there's no way they're gonna, the state is gonna say instead of getting 2.4 million, it's gonna be the smallest amount, but even if it is, there's the extra.
1.8 million set aside.
And the reserve the contingency reserve in schools. So I think I'm feeling it's gonna be like 4.3. So, I mean, but just, it's gonna be a lot higher, so.
So just want to be clear, the funding level that was approved for 22 was $39.828 million. In order to balance essentially get rid of the cuts, provide additional funding for Alicia, we're going to have to be down in the 39.4 area. So it's lower than the 22 approved. I just want to be clear that we're all thinking about that in the same way. So you're going to need 39.4 roughly in local funding which is about $400,000 less than the adopted FY 2022 level of funding.
Which is also being balanced with a increase of 4.3 million is what we expect from the state.
Correct.
So we got to look at the net, not the gross, right? We got to look at the net. So the increase to city school, there's a net increase to city schools with this strategy.
Oh, Dr. Wells.
Yes, just so I'm clear, because I have a headache, I'm sorry. It's been overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed. But anyway, so it was 40, right? But now we're reducing that now to 39.4. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So 39.4 to which year was that? 2020?
22, last year. 22.
And last year it was 40?
40.7. Well, this budget year is 40.
So this budget year was 40.7. So we're going, reducing to 39.4.
But the percent increase to the classroom
Yeah.
would be.
But as far as, let's make sure I'm clear, make sure we're on the same page. So make sure you're on the same page. So we're going from last year 40 point, whatever, 40.8 to now 39.4. Is that right?
2.9 million more for city schools than in last year's total budget. Because you got to factor in the state funds.
Okay, I'm not factoring the safe. I'm answering a question. So as far as city funding, I'm getting confused. So city funding is going from 40.8 to 39.4. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's as far as city funding. I want to make sure we all understand, make sure we're on the same page. So we're going from 40.8 to 39.4. Okay? Let's make sure we're on the same page.
And they requested
Right,
47,983.
yeah. So, wow. I want to make sure we're on the same page. I want to make sure everybody understands that. We're going from 40.8 to 39.4. I do not agree with that. Make sure it's on record. I do not agree with that. Okay, thank you.
I love the grandstanding here, but candidly, the total number is going up. And so while the local number might be amended one way or the other, Councilman Wilder, so we're all on the same page, the total number is going up. So I don't want there to be any insinuation one way or the other of where the total full picture is. So candidly, I don't know what your attempt was with that, but if it was an attempt to insinuate that this council doesn't appreciate the school division or anything of that nature, quite frankly,
Yeah.
I hope that was not the case, because this council wants to prioritize, and oh, look at me, Councilmember Wilder,
Yes.
this council is going to prioritize the classroom, and we would appreciate your support in doing that.
Oh, yes.
But ultimately,
Yes.
the request from the school division, and you can patronize me all you want, this request from the school division was out of this world. We couldn't do it. It would break the backs of the homeowners and the property owners of this city. And so I don't know what your direction was to accomplish with that, but I do hope that when the record does come out, that this council is saying to the teacher, to the frontline worker, that we prioritize them because the school division hasn't. That's the narrative that rings true.
I'm trying to, so where to go? I'm trying to make sure I'm holy. But the city funding portion has decreased. I'm not trying to grandstand, I'm just trying to make sure I have the facts straight. So if you think I'm grandstanding, I apologize. I'm not a grandstander. I have too much integrity to be a grandstander. I'm a man of God. I'm a man of integrity. I have to make sure I have the facts straight. So I asked the question, it's not being grandstanding. I'm just making sure I understand the question. The question is, the city funding has been decreased. I hear we're saying the state funding is increasing, but the city funding, a portion, has decreased. I just asked the question, not grandstanding. I'm trying to make sure I understand. So the city funding has decreased from 40.8 to 39.4. I just make sure I got the
Forgive
question.
me, you weren't grandstanding, you were showboating.
Okay, all right. My brother, first of all, I don't call you names. I don't call you
I didn't
character.
call your name. I said what you
Yes,
were doing.
I don't care. That's not right. I'm sorry. I take offense to that. That is not right. I want to make sure people understand that that's not right. I do not do that. I just ask questions. You know, that's not.
Please, council, I would ask the council to stop name calling and just, let's keep it professional, please. Councilman Helgeson, please.
So when we look at the difference between local and state money, I think Greg had brought this up, and for those who didn't understand it before, recognize the composite index. The composite index is a function of when we become poorer as a city, or what contribution we're required to make locally. Lots of times, the state gives us more. Not saying the requirements are more, but that it's intentionally to take the pressure off the local taxpayer. That's the whole purpose of the composite index. You know, when it declines, we should be giving less. When there's less students served, we should be giving less. But we just base some number based on what was last year, as opposed to metrics of in the classroom, improving the results, and that's where that goes. So it's not one thing, it's the total amount that's going there. You know, do you have less money if you have it in your right pocket or your left? No. So anyway, this is a good thing, so.
Do you feel comfortable with your direction?
I do, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. We will have ordinances prepared unless they're, I know that Councilmember Missions intends to send over the presentation, have the schools. You do have a work session on Tuesday in advance of your formal docket where many of these ordinances will be positioned for their first reading. I was going to propose considering, and thank you, each of you. I mean, we've met every Tuesday since the middle of March, and so I know that it takes quite a bit of an investment, and all the time spent kind of looking at these things. Mr. Mission's example of, I looked at your nameplate and I was, wait a minute, that's not Larry. That's, yeah.
I was promoted.
Each of you have put in so much effort in this process. I was going to suggest that we not necessarily have the work session on Tuesday, give everybody a bit of a breather, unless maybe what comes back to Mr. Missions and the body here is some kind of conversation. I would, last little thing, if it's okay, each one of you supported public safety. I mean, 201. And we talked a little bit about the Horizon opportunity, and I think we've got a path forward. Met with Melissa Lucy this week, actually talked to Frank Rogers in Campbell County, and he's going to talk to his Board of Supervisors. It looks like with the opioid money and a grant that we can apply for, we can get as much as $1.99 million. The ask or the need right now is 4.1. I'm working with Donna and with our city attorney about a resource that we could position that would say when and if they're prepared and ready to move forward, exhausting all means to kind of meet that grant need first. We would kind of pull it from either from surplus or fund balance or something, that number, assign it, and then when it's necessary and needed, we come back to this body to appropriate it. I do think that the resource in meeting with Ryan and talking to many of you in 25 to have that kind of opportunity here in our city and that people could use it to access it, I think would help support what I know that's been very important for each of you is public safety. That would provide that relief factor for our police officers who are having to spend much time at the hospital as opposed to out on the streets. So if that was the last thing, Madam Mayor, I was just looking to see whether or not there was general consensus to help support Horizons and their opportunity to establish that center.
Advocating for it, and I know we talked about it, I don't think anyone's opposed to it, but I have to say this is probably one of the most critical elements of things going on in our community, and that's the mental health issue. If this is something we can get rolling and see finalized over the next 2 to 3 years on construction and jobs and so on and so forth, this could really make a significant impact both on our law enforcement presence, strain, but also those who need help in times of need for this kind of issue. So I would ask council to support this. I would note that Senator Newman and our delegation to Richmond has made significant effort as to getting state funding for this project, and I think unprecedented, and it would also be unprecedented, I believe, for this council to boldly step forward in this way and secure this money to see this thing through. And I do believe this is something all 7 of us can get behind, as the manager's outlined. And stealing a line from Greg, I can't take credit for it, but truly this would be the #1 quickest way to get more officers on the street, is to see this service put into play. And I think the city stands to be a leader in that for our entire region.
Anybody have any questions or comments in opposition? Councilman Missions?
I would just say I fully support it. We're looking at best case scenario. If we get the grants, about 2.2 million from
Maybe even better.
fund balance surplus.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would fully support that. I think that needs to be a priority in our budget moving forward.
And that's still gonna be the discussion, so we don't wanna overplay, hopefully.
Right.
We're not going to say how much money, and then Campbell's going to say, oh, great, we don't have to do anything. So we need to kind of.
Campbell's participation is just that. It's just them being a part of the grant. We are the fiscal agent, and it requires, just like Go Virginia, when you show that there's, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, you knew this as well. So when you show more participation, the state responds better with that. And so in talking with Campbell to partner with us, that helps, that influences that state component of that grant money. So.
But all of this does need to be a little more regional because of the fact that when you go over to the hospital,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you got Nelson, you got Amherst sheriffs, you got Bedford, Campbell, Lynchburg. They're all
Rockbridge.
sitting over. They got their own signs that people can't park there other than law enforcement because
We just have a short turnaround, May 5th, for that grant to apply, and I just really want to say thank you to County Administrator Frank Rogers for being open to the conversation, because we actually literally called him today to help kind of.
Is there an opportunity to get any more counties on board?
Before May 5th, not necessarily. We can do what we can, and maybe by this, if people are watching, we're here and open. But right now, that it looks like Campbell be that original participant, which is necessary to apply for the grant.
Okay, before I adjourn us, just confirming, we're planning right now just to have a 7:30 meeting next week, unless we have a need for the 4 o'clock.
That would be my recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned. Our next meeting will be held next week, May 9th, 2023 at 7:30, back down in chamber.